Every 41 years, the sky over Anselm scours the colony down to bare rock, and every 41 years the colony comes back up and plants it again. The survey office has recommended abandonment 6 times. The recommendations are well argued. Anselm's orbit carries it through the debris apron of a shattered inner world once per long cycle, and for 9 weeks the upper atmosphere becomes a shooting gallery. Not the romantic kind, the kind that strips topsoil, flattens structures, and deposits enough particulate to drop surface temperature by 14 degrees for a year and a half afterward. Nothing above ground survives. Not the farms, not the housing, not the survey masts. The colony has been through 5 cycles and has rebuilt 5 times, and each rebuild has cost more than relocating the entire population would have. The 6th recommendation, filed 11 years before the cycle that matters, is the shortest and the most exasperated. It runs to a page and a half, and its concluding sentence has become, on Anselm, a kind of joke that is not entirely a joke. The settlement demonstrates no strategic, agricultural, or industrial characteristic which would justify continued support, and the population's stated reasons for remaining do not withstand examination. The population's stated reasons had never been examined. That is the part the survey office got wrong, and it got it wrong for 200 years, because it kept asking the question in a form that produced a useless answer. They asked, "Why do you stay?" And the people of Anselm, who are farmers and not diplomats and who had been asked this by a great many condescending officials over 5 cycles, gave the answer that stopped the conversation fastest. It is home. It is home, and it was true, and it was also not the reason, and nobody on Anselm was under any obligation to explain the reason to somebody who had already decided they were sentimental. Theodora Vance arrived on Anselm 9 years before the 6th cycle on a 2-year contract to close the place down. That was not the official framing. Officially, she was a resettlement liaison sent to assess relocation logistics and prepare a voluntary transfer program. Everybody involved understood what it was. She had done it twice before on smaller settlements, and she was good at it in the specific way that matters. She did not lie to people, she did not hurry them, and she had a talent for identifying the one thing a community could not bear to leave behind, and then arranging for it to come along. She spent her first 4 months doing what she always did, which was to say nothing and go to everything: harvest meetings, school committees, the interminable Tuesday sessions of the drainage board. She ate a great deal of the local grain, which is grey and unappealing, and which she came to prefer. In her 5th month, she noticed the sheds. Anselm builds above ground and loses it every cycle, and the whole economy of the place is organized around that fact. The housing is deliberately cheap, prefabricated, unloved, designed to be written off. The farm equipment is old and heavily repaired because nobody sinks money into a machine that has to go underground in 9 years anyway. Everything on the surface is provisional, and the colony's relationship to its own buildings is famously careless in a way that outsiders find slovenly. Except the sheds. There are 206 of them, scattered across the agricultural plain in no pattern Vance could see, and they are built like nothing else on the planet. Deep-founded, reinforced, some of them keyed directly into bedrock. They cost more than the houses. They are maintained obsessively. And in the 4 months Vance had been on Anselm, she had never once seen anybody go into one. She asked what they were for and got a straight answer, immediately, from the first person she asked. Collection. It took her another 3 months to find out what that meant, and the reason it took 3 months is that she assumed she had already understood it. The debris apron is not rubble. That is the assumption everybody makes, and it is the reason the survey office never looked. The inner world that shattered was differentiated. It had got far enough along in its life to separate out a core before whatever happened to it happened, and what is falling on Anselm every 41 years is not undifferentiated rock. It is core material. Specifically, it is a suite of refractory metals in native alloy, in fragments, distributed across 9 weeks and an entire hemisphere at a concentration that no ore body anywhere in surveyed space comes close to. Per ton of soil, Anselm's post-cycle regolith assays higher than the richest working mine in the sector by a factor of about 60. The Survey Office knew this. It is in the original planetary assessment, in the geology annex, and it has been in every subsequent report. And it has never once been flagged as significant, and the reason for that is entirely rational. The fragments are small, they are scattered across a hemisphere, and the recovery cost of sieving an entire planet's topsoil for them is catastrophically higher than the value of what you would get out. Extracting Anselm's wealth by mining it is not economically absurd. It is physically absurd. You would have to process the planet, unless something else did the sieving for you. The grey grain that Vance had come to prefer is a modified terrestrial cultivar that the colony's first agronomists spent 40 years developing and that grows badly, tastes worse, and yields about a third of what it should. It has one property that its developers selected for with enormous patience across 3 generations, and it is not a nutritional property. It is a hyperaccumulator. It pulls refractory metal out of the soil and concentrates it in the stalk. Anselm does not harvest food. Anselm harvests the stalks, burns them, and puts the ash in the sheds. Vance worked it out in a drainage board meeting, which she has always maintained is the correct place to understand anything about a farming settlement. Somebody was arguing about a culvert. The argument had been going for 40 minutes and turned on whether a proposed rerouting would carry runoff away from the northeast quarter, and an elderly woman named Sen Achebe finally lost patience and said the thing that broke it open. You cannot take the water off the northeast. The northeast is thin. It has been thin since the 4th cycle, and it will be thin until the 7th, and if you drain it, you will be handing 400 hectares of accumulation to the river. Accumulation, not soil, not land. Accumulation. Vance went back to her rooms and pulled the colony's agricultural records, which are public, exhaustive, and profoundly boring, and which nobody from the Survey Office had opened in 140 years. They are not agricultural records. They are an assay series. Every field on Anselm has been sampled every season for 206 years. The colony knows, to a precision that would embarrass a professional geologist, exactly how much metal is in every hectare of its plain, how fast the crop pulls it, how deposition varies across the hemisphere, and how the whole thing shifts after each cycle when a new layer comes down. There are families on Anselm who have farmed the same 400 hectares for 5 generations, and who can tell you the assay history of that ground going back to before their great-grandparents were born. The sheds hold the ash, 200 years of it. Vance did the arithmetic that night, twice, because she got a number she did not believe and then got it again. The contents of the sheds, at current market, exceeded the gross annual product of the 6 nearest inhabited systems combined. The obvious question is why they had never sold any of it, and the answer is that they had, and that this was the part Vance found genuinely difficult. Anselm sells ash. It has been selling ash for 160 years, in small quantities, through 4 intermediaries, at prices that are deliberately unremarkable, described in the manifests as agricultural residue, mineral-bearing. The revenue is modest and entirely plausible for a marginal farming colony, and it pays for the things Anselm cannot make, medical supplies, the prefabricated housing it throws away every cycle, and the deep shelters. They sell about 1% of what they could. They have been doing this deliberately, as policy, since a settlement-wide vote in the 2nd cycle. Vance asked Sen Achebe about it directly, in the woman's kitchen, and Achebe, who was 91 and had lived through 2 cycles and had exactly no interest in impressing a resettlement liaison, laid it out in about 4 minutes. You are wondering why we are poor. I am wondering why you have chosen to be. Because the moment we are rich, we are not farmers. We are a deposit. Achebe was cutting something up while she said this and did not stop. Think it through. We announce what is in the sheds. What happens? Within 9 years, there are 40,000 people here who came for the metal and machinery on the plain. And somebody builds a proper town because a proper town is what you build when you are making money. And then the sky comes down. She put the knife down at that point, which the transcript notes because she had not put it down for anything else. We survived the cycle because we own nothing worth saving. Everything on the surface is rubbish, and everybody here knows it is rubbish. And when the warning comes, we walk away from all of it without one argument, and we go down and we come back up. Try that with 40,000 people who have just built houses they love. This is the thing the survey office had been unable to see for 200 years, and it is not a secret, and it was never hidden. It is simply invisible to the question they kept asking. Anselm is not a settlement that endures a catastrophe. It is a settlement that has been designed around a catastrophe at every level with a thoroughness that took 5 generations, and the poverty is not a failure of the design, it is a load-bearing element of it. The cheap housing is cheap so it can be abandoned in a day. The old machinery is old so nobody hesitates. The farms are laid out for evacuation, not for yield. The famous carelessness about buildings is not carelessness. It is 2 centuries of cultural work aimed at ensuring that nothing above ground is ever loved, because a thing that is loved is a thing somebody will die trying to save when the sky starts falling. And the wealth stays in the sheds, and the sheds are keyed into bedrock, and the sheds are the only structures on Anselm that are built to last, and the entire economy is arranged so that on the day the warning comes, every single person on the planet can walk away from everything they own without a moment's difficulty. Their casualty figures across 5 cycles are the lowest of any comparable hazard event anywhere in human space. 4th cycle, 9 deaths, all of them from a shelter mechanical failure and none from the evacuation. 5th cycle, 2. Vance's report is 140 pages, and the first 3 sentences are the only ones anybody has ever needed. Anselm should not be resettled. Anselm should be studied. The population's stated reasons for remaining withstand examination perfectly well. Nobody has previously conducted one. The 6th cycle came 9 years later, and Vance was still there, on her 4th consecutive contract extension, with a job title that had been revised twice and no longer contained the word resettlement. The evacuation took 6 days. It has taken 6 days every cycle since the 3rd, and it will take 6 days next time because it is not an emergency procedure, it is a routine. And Anselm rehearses it in the 11th month of every year, the way other places have a harvest festival. Children learn the shelter assignments before they learn to write. The final ground-level task on the last day is not a security sweep or a shutdown checklist. It is one designated person walking the plane to confirm that every shed door is sealed, and it is regarded as an honor, and it is given to somebody different each cycle. In the 6th cycle, it was given to Vance. She has said, repeatedly and with visible discomfort, that this was a political gesture and that she understood it as one and that she did it anyway. She walked 41 kilometers over 2 days and checked 206 doors and then went underground with everybody else. The 9 weeks below are the part nobody writes about because there is nothing to write. Anselm's shelters are unglamorous, crowded, well-provisioned, and staggeringly boring. The colony's entire library of surface photographs was originally assembled to give people something to argue about during cycles. The children's schooling continues without interruption. There is a great deal of card playing. When the apron passed and the surface teams went up, they found what they always find: bare scoured rock, a 14-degree temperature drop, no structures, and a fresh layer of the richest regolith in surveyed space lying over 400,000 hectares of farmland. The colony came up. The colony planted it. The report did not stay buried, and the argument it started has run for 60 years and is not settled. The case for leaving Anselm alone is Vance's, and it is simple. The system works. It has worked for 2 centuries. It produces the lowest hazard event casualty rate on record, and every proposal to improve it involves introducing the exact thing the design exists to exclude, which is permanent surface value. The case against is not stupid, and it should be stated properly. Anselm's population lives at a material standard well below the sectoral median. Their medical outcomes are poor. Their children have fewer options than children elsewhere, and a proportion of them leave and do not come back, and the ones who leave cite the poverty and not the sky. The colony is sitting on wealth that could transform its own conditions and has voted, repeatedly, over 5 generations, not to touch it, and the people voting are not the people who will be 19 years old in the 7th cycle. The colony keeps a record of them, which is not something it had to do and which says a good deal about how seriously it takes the objection. Between the 5th cycle and the 6th, 409 people left Anselm permanently. The register lists each of them by name, with their age, and with a single line in their own words if they chose to give one, and about half did. They are not bitter, mostly. That is what makes the register hard to work through. A 19-year-old who left in the 9th year before the cycle wrote, "I want to own something." A woman of 34 wrote, "My daughter has asthma, and the dust after a cycle lasts 18 months. One line from a man who left at 51 after farming the same ground for 30 years is quoted in council sessions to this day whenever the vote comes round. Nothing here is wrong. I'm simply tired of living somewhere that is always about to end." Sen Achebe's granddaughter, who chairs the settlement council now, has made the counter-argument better than any outsider has. They tell us we are choosing poverty for our children. That is true. What they never say is the other half, which is that the alternative is choosing a town for our children, and a town is a thing you do not leave in 6 days. We are not preserving a tradition. We have run this 5 times. Every single time the colonies that did it differently are gone, and we have their records, and the records all say the same thing. The deaths were not from the sky. The deaths were from people going back for something. There is a museum now, which Anselm resisted for a decade and eventually accepted on its own terms, and its terms are the most Anselm thing about it. It is underground. It is in the shelter complex, in a side gallery off the main hall, and it is only open during cycles, which is to say for 9 weeks every 41 years, when the entire population is down there with nothing to do, and every one of them will walk past it 100 times. It does not display metal. There is no ash on show, no assay charts, none of the material that makes Anselm remarkable to outsiders. It displays the things people went back for. There are 41 objects. A wooden chair, a box of letters, water damaged, a cabinet of pressed flowers from a garden that existed for 30 years in the 2nd cycle, a child's model aircraft, unfinished. Each one is labeled with a name, a cycle number, and one line describing what happened to the person who returned for it, and 11 of those lines end the same way. The chair belonged to a man called Osei Brandt, 3rd cycle, who went back on the 7th day for a thing his wife had made, and who was caught on the plane and survived with injuries that ended his working life, and who donated the chair himself 40 years later with a note that the museum reproduces in full because he insisted. I would like it understood that I do not regret going back, and that this is exactly why the chair should be here. I was not stupid, and I was not careless. I simply loved a thing that was on the surface, and that is all it takes, and it will happen to somebody else in every cycle from now until the sun goes out. Put it where they can see it on their way to the card tables. Theodora Vance died on Anselm at 88, 4 years into the count toward the 7th cycle, having spent 51 years on a 2-year contract. She left instructions that were characteristically practical, and that the colony followed without discussion. No surface memorial, nothing that anybody would be tempted to go back for. Her name is on the shelter wall with everybody else's, in the long list of people who died between cycles, which is maintained down there because it is the only place on the planet where a list survives. The 7th cycle is 37 years out. The sheds are full, and the colony is still poor, and the vote to keep it that way was held again, 11 years ago, and passed, by a smaller margin than last time, which the council chair has described in public as the most encouraging result of her career. "It should get closer every time," she said. "If it stops getting closer, that means we have stopped arguing about it, and a rule nobody argues about is a rule nobody understands. The day this vote is unanimous is the day I start worrying, because it will mean we are keeping it because it is what we do. We are not keeping it because it is what we do. We are keeping it because the sky comes down every 41 years, and we have counted the cost of loving something up there." The grey grain went in on schedule that spring, across 400,000 hectares of the richest ground in surveyed space, and it came up thin and unappealing, as it always does, and in 9 months they will burn it and put the ash in the sheds. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new one leaves Earth every day.